Anyway, you're watching the Gary Hardford Show. We're talking about chickens, Dance with Chickens. It's the Johnny Cash chicken story. I don't know what we want to call this thing, but this segment. It might be another episode. Is called Chicken Butchering. The butchering. All right. Those of you that don't know anything about chicken butchering, this is how it goes. Chicken butchering towards the fall, it's still nice out. It's still pretty warm out. So I don't know. I guess I can't tell you that part. August, September, August? I don't know. End of August? Anyway, it was hot. I remember it was hot, this story right here. It was that same summer, the summer of the chicken. The summer of Tom Jones and Johnny Cash. Chickens. Brad and I. Well, every year before then, Brad and I are, I don't know how, we're 7 or 8 or 9, just we're right in that area of age. Well, the prior years, even though we're young like that, we didn't have pet chickens or anything, but we were involved in chicken butchering day. And that's when, our 60 or 80 chickens, they had to be butchered, and they all had to go. And my aunt and uncle, Brad's mom and dad, they were always involved because they helped pay for some of the feed and some of the upkeep of the chicken. Even though we would take care of the chickens, at our farm, they would barter, with milk and stuff from their parents, dairy farm, and so we trade things off and junk, and beef and chickens. Well, they were into the chickens as much as everybody likes fresh chickens. They had their own garden. We had ours, but we'd exchange canned goods, and it was awesome. But they would always come over for chicken butchering, and so it'd be Brad and his brother Dan, and their mom and dad, me and my sister, my mom and dad, and my Uncle Mel. And Dad, we'd get set up before Brad and his family would come over. We'd have to get stuff set up ahead of time, and we'd always grill and have, brats or hot dogs or hamburgers. And my dad would go into the freezer and, because we were just right around the corner is cow butchering. So right now it's chicken butchering. So we had, any other chickens. I think we were grilling chickens too, and absolutely, we'd grill chickens. If there's leftover chickens for the following year, we're going to butcher all these. We're going to fill the freezer with fresh chickens. So let's eat up, what's left. And what my dad would save, and he'd always do that with the meat too. Where I wanted steak, sometimes we'd have to have liver or heart or tongue, cow tongue. And I knew what was in the freezer, and there's these beautiful steaks in there. And my dad's like, "Oh no, we can't eat all that at one time. Got to eat the other meat too," and a lot of burger, which was fine. I like burger. My mom would make hot dishes. We're trying to make like a side of beef or whatever last a whole year before butchering again. And then Brad's mom and dad would have a side of beef too. The other side we'd work together. With different relatives, and I remember them mostly with the chickens. We'd split them up, and so my dad and I and my uncle would get these big kettles, and we had a big burner for heating up and boiling water, and these big oblong, big metal and copper kettles with handles on each side. You've seen those. I don't know, they can hold 10 gallons, 15 gallons of water, something like that. And my dad would get a burner underneath there and start boiling that water. So we'd have all these stations. So this was the boiling station, right next to we had a chopping block in our yard from an old tree that was cut down years ago. And my dad would make sure that stump was in pristine condition, and even though he chopped chickens' heads off with it, he made sure that the rain and the weather didn't, just destroy this station, this main, beheading station that we had. So he kept that up, and so the boiling stuff was going on there. And then a big thing of cold water was next to that. So he'd have that thing going. then after they're boiled, that they after their heads are off, they'd go in this big 50-gallon drum. So when everybody was over there, my dad would be the one, or trade off with my uncle, and cutting these chickens' heads off. Brad and I would go in there, or his brother Dan, and my uncle once in a while when he wasn't busy, would go and get the chickens, 2 at a time from the chicken coop, and then away we'd go. First the heads were off, then he'd throw the bodies into this big 50-gallon drum, and they would jump around there, and then after it settled down, he'd have a piece of plywood, a round piece of plywood that we'd put over there, because sometimes they would spring out of there, and sometimes they would hit the big round, half-inch plywood thing on top that was put over that 50-gallon drum. They'd hit that so hard, but they'd spring up from the bottom, and then they knock it off, and the next jump they're out, and their bloody bodies are leaping around our yard, and Brad and I would be like, yeah, and be chasing them, and we're just young, and grabbing them and trying to put it in there. Brad and I would always wear our blue jeans, and we'd wear our t-shirts, and we'd roll up our sleeves a little bit to make us look more tough or something, and we'd just try to get bloody throughout that day. We just loved to see who could get the bloodiest from chicken blood. Anyway, let's say the half-inch plywood wouldn't come off and the chickens wouldn't get out. Most times they wouldn't, but once in a while this would happen every year. But we'd keep them in there, and then once they settled down enough, their bodies were done jumping around, then we'd take that off, and then Brad and I, and our moms and dad let us do this. Let us take turns together crawling into the barrel and getting these chickens out, and the blood would be dripping off the top of the barrel because we were so little we couldn't stand up and grab them, so we'd tilt the barrel and there'd be blood on the bottom of the barrel and all the sides, and it'd drip down on us, and my sister would get grossed out, and Brad's brother Dan would laugh, and our moms would be grossed out, and our dads and stuff would laugh, and my uncle, he'd be drinking Old Milwaukee, and my dad liked Old Milwaukee too, and so did my uncle, and so would our moms, but they kind of didn't have to drink all day. Where my uncle, he like, come on, man, we're butchering chickens. Let's make this into a party. Let's have some beers. And anyway, my dad let him, but my uncle kind of had trouble with alcohol and would get into trouble in fights and bars. And my dad was a deputy sheriff, and he'd have to, go get him, and just there's all these stories. But so they would laugh at us, and and then they'd be boiled in this water for a little while. Grab their feet, go back and forth, and just get all those feathers all real, in that boiling water, and it would stink, like just the boiled feather, and that it's a unique smell, and you got used to it, but it sucked in the beginning. You're like, jeez. So my dad, my uncle, they'd take turns. My dad would always cut the heads off, and we just keep this assembly line going. Right when we get a couple more, then a couple more chickens, and we had 80 of them to go through, or 60 or 80. I can't remember. It was a lot of chickens to go through that day. From there, they're boiled, and then they were put in that cold water. Then they were hung up on the clothesline, and that's where Dan and Brad's brother and his dad would be there, plucking the feathers. Brad and I were so squirrely at that age, we'd go over and help a little bit, but then we're back, we just couldn't wait for the heads to be cut off and have those chickens be jumping around that barrel. That was like, we both were just like, oh, yeah. So we went, anyway, then from there, after the feathers were all plucked off, then Dan's father would take a torch and torch off, the fine hair and the pin feathers, anything left, and get them all good. And then they would go on to this big workstation where my mom was, and where Brad's mom was, and where my sister was. And then they would be busy, quartering the chickens out, and cutting them up, throwing the guts away, and then every so often there'd be too many heads around, so they're like, my dad would be like, Gary, you and Brad grab those heads, you're just getting too many of them around here, Okay, bury him, put him out, on the edge of the garden, on the far side of the garden towards the railroad track side. And we already had a hole there. My dad that was part of the prep. My dad would have a hole there, and we'd go bring those heads over there, and I would do that. My uncle came over one time, and the feet, and they'd cut the feet off too after they're boiled, and the feet would come off, and they'd be hung up. Well, anyway, the feet, they were hung by the feet. Not after when they're on the clothesline, they'd be hung by their feet. But then when they went to the table, so I think our moms, so on our way from getting the heads, we would go over to where my mom and sister and Brad's mom were, and we would get all the feet. Well, my uncle, he was just really smart this way. He knew kind of weird things, and he showed us a couple things with the head and pulling some nerves, and he was making the jaw go up and down, and we're like, what? No way! We're like, we just, little kids, little boys, we just like ate that stuff up. We just thought that was so cool. And then my uncle Mel, he's an older guy. You respect your elders, and we just loved it. And then he'd take the feet, chicken feet, and he'd say, okay, see this tendon here, see this here. Okay, I'll grab hold of your fingernails. Got any fingernails? Okay, don't ever bite your fingernails. Which he threw that in because I bite my fingernails. I always have. And anyway, he's trying to get me to stop. So my mom and dad. But anyway, he's like, it's a joke. And here I didn't have any fingernails really. But anyway, he'd say, grab a hold here, and he taught us how to open the feet up, open and close them by pulling tendons. And I remember that too as a kid, going, cool, can we keep one? He's like, no, throw them in there. You can't do that tomorrow. Rigor mortis, that's it. Just let your side show you that. And we're like, thanks, Uncle Mel. And oh yeah,